Welcome to the Chess Angle. My name is Neil. I am the founder and director of the Long Island Chess Club in New York. This podcast is all about chess, tournament play, and improvement at the amateur and club level. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @thechessangle. I am very happy to announce that Chessable is now a sponsor of this podcast. It's a great company with great people, and their instructional material is outstanding. I know many of you are already using Chessable, but for those who haven't yet, their courses are phenomenal, and their approach to improving your chess is unlike anything you've seen before. Chessable uses science-backed learning and the concept of spaced repetition to increase retention and ensure that you're learning the material. I recently started a course called the Agile London System, which is based on the book of the same name. Links to Chessable's homepage, as well as the course I just mentioned, are in the show notes. Check out chessable.com today. Now let's get to this week's content. For this interview episode, I spoke with USCF Expert, Long Island Chess Club regular, and my friend, Jarrod Tavares. Jarrod is a successful club player with a peak rating of about 2100, and right now he's bouncing around in the very high 1900s, low 2000s range, which of course is a very high rating at the amateur level. Jarrod has a very unique and unconventional style that often quote-unquote violates book rules and ideas, and I wanted to pick his brain about that and his tournament success in general. His style is kind of a psychological approach where he gets into his opponent's head rather than a literal theoretical approach. I'm not saying you have to play that way, but it can be very effective and is certainly fascinating to talk about. I believe amateur players and adult improvers of all levels will enjoy our discussion. My chat with Jarrod begins right now. Hey, Jarrod, what's going on? Welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I have to bust your chops a little bit. This is your first time using Zoom, so I guess I'm honored, but how did you get through 2021 without using Zoom at all?
I just never used it. We had audio only meetings at work, so we didn't need Zoom for that. So I just never had the need to download it.
Okay. Yeah, it's not really my favorite anyway. It's not actually ideal for podcasts, even though like everybody uses it. I'm looking into some other platforms, but it's good for now, I guess. But that's funny because when I said we were going to record via Zoom, and you were like, "Is that easy to download?"
People assume I'm computer savvy, but I don't really know anything.
I would have said, if I had a technical question, I would have said, I'm going to ask Jarrod. You just seem like you know that stuff. There's a rumor floating around that you, Tim Mirabile, and Tony Renna are starting a grassroots movement to ban the London system from chess. So is there any truth to this?
Well, I don't know if there's truth that Tony would be involved in such a thing, but I floated it out there along with maybe banning like the Berlin Wall from super competitive chess. But yeah, no one thinks that's a good idea or doable. I mean, I think what you would do is just say like maybe the third move of the London is an illegal move or something, and that's how you would implement it. It's definitely doable.
Right. No more bishop f4. Yeah.
Right. Well, there you go. Yeah. You can't play bishop f4 in that position. It's just an illegal move.
Yeah. Well, there's that funny meme. I like all the London system memes that make fun of it. There's one that's floating around on Twitter. It was like signs of a sociopath. It was like lack of empathy for others, impulsive behavior, lying for personal gain. And then the last one was d4, knight f6, bishop f4. So
when you don't like facing it and then you see your opponent beginning that, you just like go through this internal panic. It's like, oh my God, this again, what am I going to do? I'm going to be stuck here for 90 minutes playing against this. It's it can make you uncomfortable if you don't like it. That's for sure.
Right. Especially if you play it more tight and positionally. Like if you plant the knight on e5 and white gets into h4 and you start an attack, it can get interesting. but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Now, usually, how do you handle the London? Because I know when we were paired last time, we haven't played in a while. I remember you said, yeah, you and your London. If you play D4, I'm playing C5. I'm just letting you know. And I played D4 and you played C5 right away. Now, did that turn into an early Queen B6? I'm a little embarrassed. I don't remember the game.
I don't remember this happening at all either,
Yeah.
but I imagine if I played C5, then I probably played Queen B6 early. I mean, well, what
Probably
else?
did.
What would be the point?
I should have had the game. Actually, I don't know if I saved that game for whatever reason. Yeah, but what I usually do, if I go D4 and then someone hits me with C5, I usually just go C3. But there's a lot of choices. I can go C3, I can go E3.
Yeah.
Different ways to play it. But what I usually do against the London is a Queen's Indian setup. Very solid. That's just me. Sometimes I'll do, C5, knight C6 and then Queen B6 myself.
I generally try to play Queen B6. That's usually my plan.
Right. Well, that's usually the most aggressive way to try to fight it.
Or if I know it's coming, like if I know my opponent and I know that they'll be made uncomfortable by this, I'll play the England Gambit or something, just completely get them out of it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the reasons I wanted you on was not so much that you can share your path to expert, and we'll get into that, but you have a very unconventional style of play. But I mean that as a compliment, because you'll play openings that kind of go against the book. You'll sort of try to get away with stuff, but it's very, very effective at the club level. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy of openings. Are you just kind of winging it and going by skill? Or like, do you do that deliberately to try to get your opponent off book and frustrate them? Like, tell me a little bit about your approach.
Certainly the second part. I mean, I'll be honest, you said that as a compliment, but it's mostly born out of laziness. I just never learned book lines. So I've lost countless games in the opening, just simply not knowing what I'm doing in a main line. So often I just try to steer away from what my opponent probably knows. And I know that I'm going to be starting the game at a disadvantage. So it hurts me there if I play a crazy gambit or whatever, but at least I won't be lost. And it's probably not the best way to play chess, but that's how I've handled, just not learning main lines.
Yeah, but I mean, it had to have helped more than it hurt. And for you to have won a lot of games, I mean, you're now, I think, high 1900s, but you were like in the 2100 range for a while. So you say you lost countless games. It can't be that many if your rating was that high doing this.
Well, I mean, to players rated higher, obviously, or even what I'm saying is the reason I open like that is because of all the losses I've suffered prior to playing that way. When I did try to play main lines, is because I didn't really learn them. I mean, I've avoided the Sicilian defense entirely. I mean, that's that's a big swath of chess openings that I just never bothered to learn. And the idea is, I'm going to start the game, at a somewhat disadvantage if I play a crazy gambit, but it won't be lost, and I'll be more familiar with the position that my opponent will be.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. You seem to have the skill. See, like a lot of players, if it's sort of off book or if it's not something they're comfortable with, that discomfort alone is often enough for them to lose the game because they sort of freak out and make these blunders. Whereas you seem to have the skill to assess these sort of offbeat positions. So like, tell me where that comes from. Is that just like a natural thing you have? Is that from studying? Because you seem to always know what like the right move is or what a good move is in these very sharp positions. So like, where does that come from?
Probably experience and practice from playing lines like that for the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, if you don't play them, if you don't play gambits, then you're not going to be experienced in finding those moves. I mean, that would be my main answer. I do think people tend to be very risk averse. even it doesn't really make sense in a chess game because, you can only win, lose, or draw. The risk aversion is helpful for everyday life. Like, I mean, so you don't lose all your money in like the stock market or something crazy like that. But, in a chess game where you can only win it or lose it, it's okay to take a risk because what's the worst that can happen? You'll lose a chess game. And I think that people try to avoid crazy tactical lines because they're afraid they're going to make a mistake or whatever. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to make a mistake in that chess game. So you have to take the risk and play and look for the best move and just go with it. I think I guess what I'm getting at is almost just confidence in those positions is a big part of the battle.
Yeah, see, that's an interesting mindset because I think most club players, I get this way myself, they are afraid to take those chances, but your whole thing is it's an amateur game. Mistakes are going to happen anyway. Why not sort of push it a little bit and try to get away with stuff? Now, do you feel your sort of off-book openings, do you feel you're being extremely risky, or is it just more of an attack style, or are you playing something where it's like, I think this move is downright unsound, but I'm going to play it anyway just to get into my opponent's head?
It varies and it depends on the opponent. I mean, succeeded with these things more at club than, travel tournaments. So that's probably because I know the players well, and I do know the players who are more likely to be bothered by things like that than others. So I will go more unsound if I feel I'm playing someone who will be very bothered by that, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. So if you're playing, let's say you're playing someone like Tim or a very solid master, you then play more classically, or do you still play that style, but maybe, you'll dial it back a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily just rating. Like there's some masters that play the same thing every time. They have a system. So, I mean, against them, I'm going to be more willing to mix it up. Somebody like, let's say, Jay Bonin, who's just very, very sound positionally, but he doesn't really play main lines himself, and he's willing to play all sorts of different openings. With against him, it's incredibly ineffective. I mean, I can't come up with someone I'd less want to play. I mean, I feel more comfortable playing people higher rated than Jay. Even at times, it's very difficult, my style, to meet him for sure.
All right. And did you spend, or do you currently spend a lot of time studying tactics? Like, do you study a lot? Do you play a lot? Like, where are you at right now with that?
Yeah, that's the thing. I really don't. I mean, I did when I was younger. I'd look for puzzles and do those online or in books. I mean, I actually did a lot of studying in books when I was in high school, but as of now, I'll watch a YouTube. Like, if I see clickbait YouTube video, I'll watch it occasionally, and that's the extent of my studying. But that's probably true of a lot of people.
Yeah. So you don't have, in other words, I'm trying to just do a little bit of a deep dive into your sort of prep, and so you're not spending, let's say, 2, 3, 4 hours a day studying chess.
No, unfortunately, no. I'm not spending any time studying chess, really.
Now, when you were younger and you did this studying, though, was there a time when you were spending that amount of time per day, or is your success more cumulative?
It's probably more cumulative. I don't think I was ever spending that much time, but in high school, when I started learning the game and learning books exist, I was reading them and studying them. And, maybe there were some days if I was really into it, it would be more than that. But then there were days where I didn't study it at all. But it wasn't a set thing. Like, my parents were never, making me study the game. So I just did it on my own if I felt like it.
Okay.
And there were days where I may have spent that amount of time.
Now tell me I want to ask you about how you achieved a rating of 2000, because a lot of people listening, myself, would love to achieve that rating, or, some people just want to get up to 1600, 1700. Tell me a little bit about how you made expert? Like, how long did that take? Was it in a short amount of time? Was it several years? When did that happen for you, and how did that happen?
When I graduated high school, I guess I was about in the 1500s. And when I went to college, I didn't really play any chess. At least no rated chess. We had a chess club where we met and goofed around, but I really was kind of out of the game for 4 years. And then when I meant when I went to college, I didn't really play any chess. And then when I came back from college, because I went to college in upstate New York, I had the 1500 or 1600 rating, and I joined the clubs in Long Island and was playing at about that strength. And it seemed that I somehow got better than I was in high school, but I'm not really sure how. So I might have like a not so satisfying answer, but um, part of what I did was I saved my games with all my opponents in the club, and I would run them through computers and run other games that my opponents played against not me, and look for mistakes and try to find good ways to prepare for people. Because I mean, in a Swiss pairing system, you could often find out who you're playing, some random pairings. You could find out who you're playing the game, have a good idea of it, and you could prepare for opponents. And I just kept doing that, and I just slowly got better. And I probably learned to play better chess as a consequence, even though I was only preparing for opponents, because now I'm learning ideas that are helpful in all games. So in a way, I was like studying without realizing it, I suppose, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And you were using a lot of analysis, or doing a lot of analysis using the engine, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible how many mistakes club players make in the first 20 moves, myself included. And there's a lot of ways to take advantage of that, even especially in games people win. I mean, it's great if you find a game that somebody won, but they made huge blunders in it. They're probably going to make them again.
Yeah, and one of the things I have to remind myself of, I was looking at my game against Figueredo. All right, he's 2100 for those of you listening, and I totally lost that game because I just psyched myself out for no reason. Because I have to remind myself, when you play a strong player, at the club level, I'm not talking about GM, but if you play a player 1900, 2000, 2100, like you said, you'd be surprised at the mistakes even they're making. But you get this mindset that, well, this guy's, 2, 3, 400 points higher than I am, that every move he's making is unbelievable. And I looked at my game with Nick, and up until the point that I fell apart, because I made a little unnecessary defensive move, and then of course that led into another mistake, it was completely equal. Like, I kept thinking he would make a move, and I was thinking, wow, that must be, and I was right there in the game, and most of my responses were within one of the top 4 choices from the engine. I was doing totally fine, and it was like I self-destructed. And I have to remind myself, usually that's not my mind. I guess for some reason that game, I have to remind myself that even players of that strength, they're not machines. They make mistakes. My play was totally fine. I was right there in the game. It was completely equal. And I ended up psyching myself out. And I think players have to remember that even players rated, let's say, above 1700, above 1800, you put their games in an engine, you're going to see all sorts of mistakes. You're going to see a lot of the moves they make aren't one of the top 3 or 4 choices that the engine makes. But you get into this mindset that every move they make is unbelievable, and it causes problems, and it goes to what you said about confidence.
Yeah, I think it can definitely seem that way, but a higher rating just means that they're making less mistakes than you are overall, but they're certainly making mistakes. And yeah, you have to remember that when you're playing a game of chess, that it's 2 imperfect humans going at it. And maybe that's a part of why people are, especially against higher rated players, they're afraid to take risks because they think, oh, they know everything, they'll be able to handle it. But that's not necessarily true.
we talked about this a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate more. Do you have a different approach or philosophy when you play a lower rated versus a higher rated? You touched on it a little bit. I'm hoping you could do a bit of a deeper dive on that.
If I know the person, it's going to be more their personality and style than necessarily their rating that I'm going to use as a factor. There's some people that seem to play the same way against offbeat openings as they do against mainline stuff, or maybe it's an opponent I know that they're not a big of a mainline person themselves. So like I know I'm not going to have to face any tricks if I just play a regular chess. So I'll do that, but it's not like, oh, he's low rated, so I can just do whatever I want. So against this guy, I'm going to play silly, but this guy's higher rated, so I'm going to play serious against him. That's definitely not it. I've played. You can ask Tim. I've played strange stuff against him before, so that's not really the factor that I use in that. Some of it, like frankly, is just my mood for the day. I mean, maybe I'm feeling a little silly on a certain day. I mean. Part of it's me. Like I want to have fun when I play chess, and that's part of how I have fun is just mixing it up.
Right, and that's pretty effective too, because then your opponent, if he's played you before, he doesn't know what direction you're going to go in.
Yeah.
Whereas you have other players like myself, admittedly, who kind of stick with the same openings, but I don't feel, as far as my style, if I get too offbeat, sometimes I feel I don't have the skill to handle that. But it's interesting.
You say you don't have the skill to handle it, but that's what I mean about people being risk averse. You need to be okay with the fact that you're going to make mistakes because you know your opponent's going to make them as well. I think that people are only thinking about the game from maybe their perspective and not from their opponent's perspective. It's okay to create a tougher position that you're going to make mistakes in because the other guy's going to make mistakes. And, you know, at the end of the game, there can only be one winner. Or a draw, but it's not like you could do something so bad where you extra lose the game. You know, I mean, like, if you mess up really bad, it's just one loss.
That's a good attitude, and the reason I'm asking you about that, I'm trying to do that a little bit more. I mean, I have my pet openings that I like, but even within those openings, I sometimes try to go in different directions. I'm trying to do that more and be more confident and comfortable doing that. And that's kind of why I'm asking you about it. But there are times where I'll go in that direction and I'll get like a really nice win as a result. So I'm trying to get more confident, more comfortable doing that, kind of opening up my game a little more.
And I think the reason we're like that is because this is what I was trying to get at with the stock market. Life generally isn't a game. Like there are many situations where you can extra lose. Like you can extra lose in the stock market. You could lose everything you own. So it's sensible to be risk averse when approaching life. But when you're playing a game, it's an unnatural, different animal that our brains aren't really hardwired to handle. Where once the game's over, that's it. No matter what terrible things or what mistakes you've made, you've only lost once. So it's okay to experiment and even embarrass yourself. I think that's something people are averse towards too. They don't like looking silly, but you can't extra lose a chess game. It's only one game.
Right. No, that's good stuff. And ego is definitely a big part of it. Now, a huge part of it. You once told me, we were talking one night and you said, well, I expect to win every game. Like that's my mindset. And when you said it, I didn't take it like, as a pompous thing. I took it as like, that's the right attitude. Like that's smart. Your mindset should be that you expect to win every game. But tell me how that helps you and how you kind of develop that mindset.
Well, I don't always succeed in it. It's hard to, if I'm playing Jay Bonin or Tim, who I've never beat either of them. How could I seriously sit down and expect to win the game? But you have to try your best to trick yourself into thinking that way. Because I mean, how could you win if you're going into the game expecting to lose? I mean, I just don't see how that could ever result in a positive outcome. So you just have to make yourself believe it, I guess.
Whenever I sit down against a stronger player, I do believe that I have a chance to win. Like, I don't think, oh, I'm going to lose this. If I'm paired against someone like a 2200, I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to lose this game.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to play my best. I'm going to try to win. And, sometimes you'll get a draw. Sometimes you might lose. Sometimes you might win. But if you sit down, it's like you said, if you sit down against a higher rated and you're like, oh, I'm going to lose this game. Well, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
So that's definitely important. So tell me about, I want to ask you about the game you had with Frank Paciulli in the tournament that just finished.
Yeah.
I saw some of the position. You had a really nice attack. Like you moved the H pawn with check, like you sacked it.
Yeah.
But you were in some bad time pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me about that position, like your thought process.
I wish I probably should have had the game in front of me, right?
No, that's all right. I know I'm kind of surprising you with this, but I know you were looking for a win, but like the clock was,
I was under a minute, so I was looking for the forced win, and if I couldn't find it, I was going to be down material. So it was really one of those things where if I can't find the win, and I didn't need to offer a draw, there was a threefold repetition available that I could take. So it was either just find the win or play the threefold. And I guess you're asking, like, sometimes chess players are in those spots where, you could go for it and maybe lose, or you don't have to go for it and you can just settle for the draw. And like, how do you decide if you should go for it or not?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, I'm not so much the position.
Yeah.
But a lot of players in that situation
Mm-hmm.
will fall apart. They'll like throw the game away.
Yeah. Or they'll bail out for the draw and then feel bad about that afterward.
Tell me a little bit what was going on in your head, because I think a lot of players struggle. They're in those types of positions and they make some bad decisions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I knew in that position it was nice because I knew that I had the bailout draw because I had the force threefold if I couldn't find anything. But I guess people aren't going to like this, but if you have to make the decision, like, do I feel the win is there, yes or no? Like, assign a fake probability to your head, and if you think it's greater than 50%, you just have to go for it. And if you lose, you lose. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to accept that. And that's, provided, I mean, it could be a situation with the standings where a draw is almost as good of a win, then obviously you take it. But if you think that there's a win there, you just have to play the best moves. And if it doesn't work out for you, you need to be willing to accept the consequences. Because, this is going back to the whole risk aversion thing. It is only a game. And I think even just that attitude that, it's only a game, losing is okay, can help you win sometimes.
Do you believe in offering a draw or accepting a draw? Because you have people on either end. Some people are like, I'm never taking a draw. Other people, every time they get nervous or if their opponent offers a draw, boom, right away, it's almost reflexively they say yes. Yeah. Then you have people in the middle like myself, which is I kind of go by a lot of factors, the position, how confident I'm feeling, what kind of day I had at work, how much time is on the clock, how I do look at my opponent's rating. I mean, if my opponent is rated significantly lower, I'm not taking a draw, even if it's dead drawn, unless, my clock is about to run out, or I'll accept a draw against a much lower rated player if I really feel I might lose the game. But do you stand on either end of that, or are you one of those guys where you're kind of in the middle and it's situation dependent?
I would say I'm in the middle and it's situation dependent. I mean, they are a part of the game. Sometimes I offer a draw to get in people's heads. I don't know if you've ever done that. But,
I love that.
It can be effective.
The psychology of draw offers is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I have done that. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it has no effect. But that's a legitimate, and for those of you, I know we have a lot of newer players to tournaments, that's not an unethical thing. That's totally permissible.
Because they can accept the draw.
Yeah, it's not like sort of a cheesy thing. You can strategically offer a draw to kind of, get in someone's head, or if you think it's going to annoy them, absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I'll do it when I feel, well, one, I have to be okay with them taking it because obviously that's an outcome that can happen. So I'll only do it when I feel that I'm worse, but I've maybe just played an interesting move that'll make them uncomfortable. And I also know a lot of times when people have that draw offer in the bank, they will spend a lot of time on the next move. And it's a good way to run people's clocks down too if you've just made a positionally interesting move, because now they're like, well, I don't want to just say no and potentially lose this game. So they're going to think for a long time about whether they should accept it or not. And you'll make a lot of time back from it. But you should only do it if you feel you're a little worse, because obviously they can say yes. So if if you do it when you're a little better, then that's maybe not the best idea.
Right. But, and sometimes you get a shocker. Like they say yes, they accept the draw right away. And like, what? Because it could be a person doesn't like draws and maybe they're higher rated. So you're like, just to get in his head, I'm going to offer a draw. And if they're like, yes, you don't know. You don't know. Maybe he's not feeling well. It could be a lot of things. But
yeah. I mean, you could, I've had games where I know I was a lot worse, but I could tell my opponent felt very uncomfortable about the game just from his face. So, yeah, throw it out there, because a lot of times people, they don't want to offer it themselves either because they feel embarrassed, or I sometimes I think draw offers go unmade because people feel that they shouldn't make a draw offer. So if if you're worse and you think your opponent might take it, throw it out there, and it's a good way to steal a half point if when you're in a worse position.
It's easy for us to do it at the club because we know the players, and it's like you said, I know which players are going to accept a draw, who are not going to accept, who are going to offer it. We have certain players, they'll only offer a draw if they feel they're much worse. So if you get a draw offer from this person, it's pretty much indicating that he thinks you're winning.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting, but I love talking about that stuff. So Jarrod, tell me about your Endgame study and how important you think it is, practically speaking, at the club level. Obviously Endgames are important, but you hear, you have to know Lucina's position and Philidor's. Do you spend a lot of time studying Endgames? Is good Endgame play a big deal when you win?
I mean, it's certainly a big deal. Unfortunately, we hit this earlier. I don't spend a lot of time studying period. So I wish I spent more time studying Endgames. And I have to be honest, I don't know them well, which is another reason I try to go for a tactical malaise in the middle game. Because if I can end the game before we get to an end game, then I didn't need to know it. I mean, every part of a chess game is important, but if I'm going to be like a little bit of a Weisenheimer here, an end game is the only thing that might not happen. I mean, every chess game is going to have an opening, and almost every chess game is going to have a middle game. You might not have an end game, so it's probably the least important of the three. But there's going to be people listening to this podcast who are going to be saying, "Oh my God, how could he say that?" I mean, there's a reason why I'm only a 1900, 2000 player, right? I mean, obviously they're important, but often when I get into an end game, I have to try to figure out over the board the best plan. I think that at minimum you should know if the end game, even if you don't know how to win it or how to draw it, if a certain end game is a win or is a draw, at least know that. Like, is rook and 3 pawns versus rook and 2 pawns, know, is that a draw or a win? Or bishops of opposite color. At least know, and then it'll be easier to figure out things over the board as it comes to you.
Okay, so you know the themes, but you're not cracking open like whatever it is, 100 end games or 1,000 end games you must know and, drilling through that, right? Who needs that when you can just get an attack using tactics in the middle game, right?
Yeah. I mean, and, some people say like the end games are boring, and, a lot of people, I guess, do come to the clubs for fun, and if they're not entertained by those, they're not going to study them. But, to be a complete chess player, you need to.
Right. No, for those of you kind of getting into this, we're obviously talking in jest. End games are important, but I just wanted to prove the point. Well, first of all, Jarrod, you're kind of being dismissive of your, 1900, 2000 is, you said only 1900, 2000. Most people would love to get a rating that high.
It's all relative, sure.
Right, it's all relative, and the second thing is, no, I just think it's interesting. You don't spend a lot of time studying endgames, but yet you've had, this type of success. It's not that endgames aren't important. I guess what I want to sort of show to the listeners is that everybody's path and everybody's skill set and everybody's sort of way of approaching it is a little bit different. You definitely need to know your basic endgames, but like you said, you can sort of look at it theoretically and size up, okay, it's rook and 3 pawns against rook and 2 pawns, but everything's on the same side of the board, so it's probably a draw, where if it's separated, you might be able to get a like you can sort of look and at least thematically know, okay, I might be up a pawn or even 2 pawns, but both kings are very well placed and it's opposite colored bishop, so it's probably a draw. Like you can probably look at it and size it up thematically that it's a draw, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like the reason why I say it's important to at least know, I mean, one of the worst things you can do is try to go for a win in a drawn endgame. That's that usually works out very bad, and if you have a sort of blindness, you can go into an endgame that's just a complete theoretical draw, but you think that it should be a win, and you're playing for a win that isn't there, and of course you end up losing the game. And I've made that mistake countless times. So,
we've all done it. You overpress.
Yeah.
You try too hard to win.
But you don't even realize that the game, maybe you were better all game, and now you've gone into an end game that's a draw. But because you don't know that, you actually think that the end game is a win, and you're pressing for a win that's not there, and then you end up creating weaknesses, and you lose. And if you had just known that this end game that you entered, which let's say it's, I don't know, bishop's an opposite color and you're only 1-1, if you had known that in the first place that it wasn't even a win, you wouldn't have done that.
So do you have any words of wisdom? You touched on it a little bit, but we have a lot of adult improvers listening to this, 20, 30, 40, 50-year-olds who are kind of just getting into the game or are rediscovering the game. Any sort of general advice that you would offer?
Yeah, I do. I don't think the way I play is best, clearly. But if you're trying to, but if you're again, as I said, that you can only lose a chess game once. It's only a game. If you're trying to improve, it will improve your tactics and middle game play. If you at least, for a year or so, play some crazy gambits, play things you're not comfortable with, for a year, just to get more acclimated to being in a tough middle game position. And then maybe just go back to main lines, because I've tried to get out of it myself to improve my chess, and we didn't really touch on this, but now that YouTube is becoming so much more popular, I've been on a downturn recently in results and rating, but a lot of people are more prepared these days for crazy lines because people post them all over YouTube. In fact, like now more and more I'm having to deal with people playing crazy stuff against me that I never saw before, probably because they saw it on YouTube, and people are more prepared to meet these openings. So you're not going to find great success playing chess that way overall, but it could lead towards improving your game just to force yourself to play some positions like that. And I think it's good to at least be well-rounded and try it occasionally. So that would be my words of wisdom for anyone trying to improve.
No, that makes sense. You have to put yourself in a position where you really have to think and force yourself through it. And that's similar to kind of what Tyrell Harriott was saying in the previous episode, where he feels like a lot of the faster time controls are actually good for you because it just forces you to make decisions and to think. And kind of like what you were saying, you got to go through a period of time where you do that. Like he was playing quick chess for a while, he was saying, and he kept losing. He was like, this isn't chess, but it helped him long term.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting, but that's again, a large reason why I wanted you on here, because I talk about, fundamentals and all the important stuff, and, stop making basic blunders and learn all your basic tactical themes. And I tend to be kind of a quote unquote safe player myself, but I kind of wanted to show the other side of it. It's sort of like the old adage, don't move the same piece twice in the opening, or, don't move a piece in the opening until you move every other piece at least once, which I think if that's not presented properly, that's almost like wrong information. It should be that generally speaking, yes, generally speaking, you don't want to move the same piece twice in the opening. Generally speaking, you want to move all your pieces at least once, but many, many times, especially in amateur games, moving the same piece twice in the opening is a tactical shot that will win you the game, or moving the same piece twice in the opening will give you a better position. Or, in some lines, like I play the Fort Knox variation of the French defense, which is something that you definitely don't play, Jarrod, where you basically move the light squared bishop twice immediately because it's the bad bishop in the French.
Is that the thing Nick Figueredo does to trade it off immediately?
Oh, I didn't know Nick does it. I haven't, you know what it is?
Yeah.
I wouldn't see Nick do it because I don't play E4. Yeah, basically it's the French defense E4, E6, D4, D5. Then you trade pawns to trade the light squared bishop. But that's an example of moving the same piece twice in the opening, but you have a justifiable reason. And the reason is that the light squared bishop is often the bad bishop for black for most of the game. So why not just move it twice, get it on that diagonal and trade it right away?
Yeah.
But I just think there's a lot of sort of, very dogmatic sort of Captain Literal advice out there. Don't move the same piece twice in the opening. Another one, don't move.
It's a dynamic
pawns.
game. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a dynamic game. It's position dependent. So if a beginner has it in his head, well, don't move the same piece twice in the opening, he might not realize that, okay, if I move my knight again, I'm going to win a piece or something, or it's going to be a winning tactic or a winning positional bind, something like that. So I think with those quote unquote rules, it should be generally speaking, this is what you do, but there are exceptions. And like you said, it's a dynamic game. It's position dependent. I mean, I had a game in the tournament we just played against an 1800 player where moving one of the pawns by my king won a piece, right? Don't move your pawns in front of the castled king, but I won a piece. And you have to, and I think you would agree, very often the moves that win games are the ones that go against the quote unquote rules, because it's those exceptions that often win the games because it's a result of a mistake by your opponent.
Yeah, well, yeah, you said it. It's a mistake by your opponent. And whenever your opponent violates a chess principle, often the response requires you to violate one of the general chess principles. So, I mean, that's why it's hard. And I think, instructors, the good ones try to get that over to people. But yeah, I mean, it's almost like knowing when to break the rules is what makes a great player in a way. I mean, it's
well, that is true.
Yeah,
that is true. I mean, and so many. I like what you said. If your opponent plays, makes a mistake, then you have to kind of you sort of have to go in. Like if he goes in a different direction and it's a bad move, to take advantage of that, you kind of have to go in a different direction as well.
Yeah, but then sometimes, sometimes the best response to mistakes is to just keep developing. And I think that's where chess instructors are going with that when they get those rules across to people. But you have to look for available tactics before you do that. I guess is what you're saying, and it's hard. It really is.
Yeah, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, a tactical shot involves a move that, might violate a quote unquote principle. Like you might make this move. Oh, but if I make this move, it's going to give me double isolated pawns. Yeah, but that move's also going to win you as bishop. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so of course.
I just think it's kind of a big picture thing, and that rules are position dependent. But like you said, that's why you're a strong player because, as you said a few moments ago, you know when to break them, right? Like, conventionally, maybe you shouldn't do this, but it's going to win a piece or it's going to open up a file or something like that, whatever it might be.
Or just create a position I know my opponent won't like to see.
Right.
Which,
right. So you're like the sort of the Dennis Rodman of chess. What I mean by that, Jarrod's looking at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm not a huge basketball fan.
Okay. Let me explain what Dennis Rodman, one of the greatest defensive players in the NBA, played for the Chicago Bulls. He would sort of interrupt the opponent's plan. Like the other team would want to do something offensively, and he would just mess it up. He would just mess everything up and totally throw them off, and the Bulls would win. And that's kind of what you do.
If you do something that your opponent doesn't want you to do, how could that not be good?
No,
right?
I'm saying it as a compliment. No,
yeah.
No,
I know you are.
Yeah, it's a compliment because that's really the best kind of player. Like your opponent will want to do something, and your thing is like, no, how about this? Now what do you do? And they sort of fall apart because they have this nice neat plan they want to do. They just kind of want to quote unquote play regular chess, and you're kind of like, no, I'm going to kind of mess you up a little bit. But you're very good at doing that. And I think that's why your rating is as high as it is. And you have the confidence to sort of handle those off-book positions. And that's been very effective for you.
Yeah. And I guess, to be fair about this and look at both sides of the coin, if you look at my results, I tend to be very effective against players weaker than me and very ineffective against players stronger than me. And that's true of everybody, of course. I mean, everybody beats players that are weaker than them more than players that are stronger than them. But for me, it's very extreme, and stronger players handle that better, I think. Like they don't lock themselves into a plan where if I disrupt their plan, their whole chess game is going to be ruined. And it's like somebody like Tim or Tony Rena. So generally the stronger the player gets, the less effective that stuff can be. So, I don't, when you ask my words of wisdom, I don't recommend it to all the kids out there to play like that. It's probably, I've been trying to get away from it myself.
Yeah.
But
don't try this at home, kids.
Yeah. But you should try it at home a little bit. It just be okay with losing a game here and there, just to improve your outlook. Be okay with losing, get better in tough tactical middle game positions. Like sometimes something like it's okay maybe to not play the best chess games all the time if it'll lead to improvement down the road. And I don't think anyone could argue with that.
I think that's very well said. I think that's very, very well said. Absolutely. And that's part of the reason I wanted you on here, because generally speaking, you are a successful club player, but I wanted your insight because it's a little bit different from, I think, your quote unquote, average player, and you've had a lot of success, but I think you're giving, I think you're not giving yourself credit where it's due. Against the heavy hitters at the club.
Well, I'm letting you give me the credit.
No,
appreciate
but
that.
Against the heavy hitters at the club, though, you're doing pretty well. I mean, when you play Tim and Nick and those guys, you're drawing them a lot, and I mean, you're not, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you're holding your own better than you're giving yourself credit for against the heavy hitters, I think.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of draws against Tim a few years ago. Lately, it hasn't been so good. But yeah, Nick, I had the draw and the win recently. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I can hang in there occasionally. You're right.
Now, lately, you talked about this a little bit on your way up to expert. You said lately you really don't study that much. Do you spend a lot of time, nowadays, looking at your games from tournaments? Like, do you still analyze with the computer a lot?
No, I really haven't been, and I'm sure that's part of the reason I've been declining a little bit. But I just, getting older, and I've got work and responsibilities, and it's just,
you're not getting old. I'm getting older. I can say I'm getting older. You're not getting older. You're
technically we all are, I suppose.
Yeah, we all are. Right, a few gray hairs here, but. All right, so Jarrod Tavares, USCF expert, Long Island Chess Club regular. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, sharing your insight. I wanted you to share your sort of unique style and kind of blend it with some of the other things we've been talking about on the podcast, because we've been getting into a lot of fundamentals and quote unquote rules. But I wanted to show a strong club player and your sort of unconventional approach, and to have, everyone hear your sort of mindset. So I appreciate you being on the podcast, Jarrod.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'll see you at the club. Maybe we'll play each other. And if I'm white, D4 is coming your way.
All right, I'll be ready.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Have a great day. And as always, I hope you win your next game.